And the Russians are far stronger, far numerous, more numerous
There's more
than
of
the Ukrainians.
them, many more, is to effect regime changes to kill Putin and take him out of power.
You know, they misunderstand probably the Russians. You know, to understand the Russians, it's a difficult thing, especially if you have an ocean between you and Russia.
Friends, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, in a recent interview with the famous American journalist Tucker Carlson, gave out just an extravaganza of revelations about Russia, Ukraine, and NATO. Orban himself is a bright representative of the Western European environment, but he said something that foreign channels would definitely not translate for their viewers. Nothing, we will help them with this. Here is my signature analysis for you. And if you have the opportunity, leave your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about what you heard right from Budapest? The interview between Tucker Carlson and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban was recorded at the official residence of the head of the Hungarian government in Budapest. The conversation took place in a chamber and formal atmosphere, emphasizing the importance of the meeting. Carlson, known for his critical approach to discussing international politics, visited Hungary specifically for an interview to personally talk with Orban about his views on the current geopolitical situation. The shooting was carried out professionally, using several cameras to create a dynamic visual series. The interview combined formal elements with casual conversation, which allowed Orban to reveal his thoughts freely and in detail. And I also noticed an interesting point. Friends, Tucker Carlson hardly asked any questions, just listened, and listened attentively. So Viktor Orban and Tucker discussed Russia, Ukraine, NATO, Europe, Putin, and everything that worries us now. But the main thing, of course, is his thoughts on how to end this conflict, which has been dragging on for too long. There is still an opinion in the United States that Ukraine is winning.
The number one issue, how to keep together the country, because the country is very big. And there's a privilege of the question how to keep together the country and not freedom. Freedom is just another issue, second, third.
But as Orban said, come on, that's a complete lie. It's not even a matter of misunderstanding. It's just outright bullshit. Anyone who knows a little bit about geopolitics understands that this is impossible. And why? It's simple. I sincerely sympathize with the Ukrainians. Their situation is a tragedy. People are dying there every day. It's a real disaster. But if you look at the situation militarily, they are running out of soldiers, but Russia does not. The conflict is about resources on Earth, about numbers, and here Russia has a clear advantage. We support a strategy that is inherently doomed. This is a bad strategy, Orban stressed. He also noted that the Biden administration apparently still believes that it is possible to change the regime in Russia. But this is an illusion. To understand Russians, you need to understand their history. For them, the main thing is to keep the country united because it is huge and diverse. And freedom is not their number one priority. The main focus is security, unity, and protection. And this reality, according to Orban, makes the West's approach absolutely untenable. Then, friends, the brightest part of the performance begins. We listen carefully. They will never give up. They will never turn off the path. They will not leave their leader. We'll spend one here and they'll invest twice as much. We will produce so many weapons and they will produce even more. And they won't get tired of Putin. Oh, come on. Stop it. This is some kind of joke. Seriously, do the West seriously think that they will overthrow Vladimir Putin? Okay, let's figure out what's really going on here. When I was Prime Minister, we all experienced the moment when Yeltsin was leaving. He was getting weaker and weaker, and it was scary. What would happen next? Will there be someone in Russia who will be able to assemble the country? Raise it, will it not bring everything to anarchy? When Putin came, we all at least breathed a sigh of relief. We saw how he began to control the country to restore order. Now in the West, it seems to me, many have forgotten how dangerous it is for Russia to have a weak leader. It's not just dangerous, it's catastrophically dangerous. The task of the West is to make Russia weak, and this, in my opinion, is a huge mistake. This approach carries with it a threat that is much greater than one can imagine. Everything that happens in Ukraine can affect us here in Budapest much faster than on the safe sofas in Washington. When I was young, I remember how Chernobyl shook the world, and the consequences of this disaster came right to us. It's the same now. The escalation of the conflict in Ukraine will affect us here and now. All this is not somewhere far away, but literally around the corner, and Washington, sitting in his chair, cannot understand this because here in Europe everything feels completely different. We feel it all for ourselves, just like a country, and it's not just words. This issue with the soldiers of Ukraine is really critical. Where will they get them if they are already sorely lacking? This is a real threat because if Western countries decide to send their soldiers to Ukraine, Russia will give a very serious response, and this, believe me, could be the beginning of World War III. The situation is heating up, and here in Europe it is especially dangerous. For us, for the people who live in this region, it is obvious that the world is on the brink. But those who are sitting in Washington, they don't seem to hear us, and this, unfortunately, is scary. The West does not want to understand how close disaster is. And here is Nord Stream 2. This topic is also amazing. It is already obvious to everyone that the Biden administration is somehow involved in the explosion of this gas pipeline, directly or through intermediaries. How is it even possible that the countries of Western Europe, especially Germany, are silent? It has hit their economy catastrophically, but they still prefer to remain silent, as if nothing had happened. When we talked about it, we were immediately told, it's just something happened, and we have clearly stated that this is a terrorist attack. But no one has officially acknowledged this. The confrontation with the West does not stop, and Europe's silence is puzzling. If I were in charge of all this, if I had to decide, I would not hesitate. I would make peace. And the sooner the better. Because this war, this conflict is not leading to anything good. I am sure that if the West continues to follow its current course, the consequences for everyone will be catastrophic. Well, friends, how do you like Viktor Orban's drive and openness? And this is just the beginning. We are listening to the second part of the interview. I promise, I will surprise you. Orban continues, quote, if there was Trump, then everything would be different. After all, despite all his scandals and absurdities, he was much more adequate in international politics. He was not clouded by ideological fanaticism and understood perfectly how the global system works. When he was president, relations with Russia, China, and North Korea were more balanced. I could even come to an agreement with Kim Jong-un, but look what's happening now. If Trump had been in Biden's place, I'm sure there would have been no war in Ukraine. It just wouldn't have come to this. Let's remember what happened a few days before Russia invaded Ukraine. The US Vice President told Zelensky that they want Ukraine to join NATO. That's the whole answer for you. This is what provoked most of today's conflict. Moreover, it was a few days before Russian troops stood at the borders of Ukraine. Isn't this a provocation? From the very beginning, Western policy was far from reality, not realizing that for Russia, Ukraine is not just a neighbor, but part of its security. And now that Russia has strengthened, it's not worth knocking on NATO's doors. This is a dead end, and the West itself understands this perfectly well. Anyway, America is in control of the situation, and that's a fact. If the United States had decided on a peace process, the conflict would have ended the next day. Ukrainians cannot fight without the support of the West. They continue to fight because they receive weapons and money from the United States. It depends on Washington how soon all this will end. If the United States wanted peace, they could solve everything. The famous peninsula is not an issue that Americans should be dealing with at all. This is exclusively Russian territory, and any intervention to return it to Ukraine is an empty dream. The realism of such a goal is zero. But apparently, some people on the other side of the ocean have not yet realized who they are dealing with. Come on, what kind of talk is this? It's a fantasy, some kind of dream. Taking Crimea, defeating Russia, and breaking its regime is not just unwise. It's complete nonsense. It's not even worth discussing. Americans like to say that I'm under Russia, under Putin. Do you know how absurd it looks? Here I have a photo from my youth. I am being arrested by the Soviet police. This was when Soviet troops were still stationed in Hungary. How can I be considered someone's agent after that? Hungary is an independent country. We have achieved sovereignty a long time ago, and no one can become a doll in anyone's hands, be it Russia, the United States, or anyone else. Yes, we have pragmatic relations with Russia, especially in the energy sector. This is logical. We take care of our interests, but I am sincerely convinced that Russia should be part of Europe's security structure. Without this, Europe will not be protected. It's obvious. However, today, of course, the opposite is true. NATO is doing everything to distance Russia from Europe as much as possible, and even provokes conflict. After all, what should NATO do if their statements are to be believed? To guarantee peace and security to its members. And what is in practice? They actively involve their members in helping Ukraine, which is not part of the alliance. These are double standards. On the one hand, they say they are protecting peace, and on the other, they are pushing the conflict forward. And what happens? NATO has become an instrument of U.S. foreign policy, not an independent organization. We have almost 1,500 kilometers of common border with Russia here in Europe. If you look back a bit, it's easy to understand that NATO's goal is not just security, but competition with Russia. The first goal is to show your superiority. NATO wants to look stronger, dominant. Look at how they use the conflict in Ukraine for PR. They say, we supply Ukraine with weapons, but Russia can do nothing. It's their way of saying they're cooler. The second goal is an attempt to weaken Russia from within through a change of power. And how was this supposed to be done? Create a conflict in Ukraine, load it with weapons, and then wait for Russia to be defeated. After that, allegedly, an internal crisis in Russia will begin, and the regime will fall. That was their plan. But from the very beginning we said, this is nonsense, this will not happen. And what do we see now? The strategy is not working. They're still hitting the same wall. Instead, it's time to acknowledge reality. It's time to change the approach. It is urgent to make peace, Viktor Orban concluded. Tucker Carlson expressed his point of view, saying that Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban stands out among European leaders as the only one who actively seeks a peaceful settlement of the crisis in Ukraine. In his post on the social network X, he asks a rhetorical question. Why is Orban the only leader in Europe trying to stop the complete destruction of Ukraine? The journalist openly criticizes those who do not support Orban's initiatives, calling them supporters of evil. This statement underscores his belief in the need for a diplomatic approach to the conflict. Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban recently met in Moscow, where the leaders discussed possible ways to resolve the Ukrainian crisis. The negotiations took place in an environment reflecting the complexity of the current geopolitical situation. Orban has once again demonstrated his willingness to act as a mediator, despite pressure from Western partners. Such statements and steps by Viktor Orban set him apart from European leaders. He takes a unique position, actively advocating for a peaceful solution to the conflict that would not only take into account the interests of the parties, but also prevent the further destruction of Ukraine. This is welcomed by influential figures such as Carlson, although it faces criticism from within the EU. I am sincerely grateful to Tucker Carlson for giving us the opportunity to see this interview. This is not just a journalistic job, it is a journey into the world of big politics from the point of view of a person who seems to understand it more deeply than most. Difficult topics, thorny questions, and the lack of fear of talking about what others are bypassing. All this makes the interview not only interesting, but vital for those who are trying to figure out the chaos of today. Tucker put everything on the table in his own style, and special thanks to him for that. Viktor Orban, without a doubt, is a politician who is difficult not to listen to. His honesty and directness are amazing. Of course, he has his own view of the world, and he does not try to hide it. Unlike many other leaders, Orban is not afraid to say what he thinks, even if it goes beyond the usual protocol answers. Thanks to him for his openness and for the fact that he did not shy away from difficult questions, even when it would have been possible to just keep silent. Honestly, his ability to look directly at difficult topics commands respect, and sometimes even a smile. He's like that friend who says, "Let's not filter, you know the truth anyway." I want to thank you for your attention. Do not forget to write your opinion about the material and subscribe to the channel. I wish you good health, friends. See you soon.